I study outer space for a living, and I get paid to do so. My life is pretty awesome. I also get to teach people about outer space. And part of what I want to do today is help you recognize, as part of my job is to help students answer questions. And there are a number of things that you need to know in terms of answering questions. First of all, there's a lot of knowledge you need to have, and you're going to hear about this, you've heard about this through your classes, you'll hear about it over and over. You need to know this, you need to know that, you need to memorize this. By the way, this is for you too, because you're still a young person as far as I'm concerned. So knowledge is important, but you also have to have skills, and you're going to hear people talk about the skills that you need to develop to be able to implement this knowledge. And that's going to be important too, but here's one almost no one ever talks about formally. They never talk about your disposition. They never talk about you. They never talk about the mindset that you need to have. And the fact that you can have all the knowledge in the world. You can be as skilled as you want to be, but if you don't have the right disposition, it doesn't mean a lot. So what I'm going to do today, my goal is to answer that question that I had at the very beginning, able to respond. One of the most important things that you have to be able to understand about yourself is how do you see the world? Let me give you an example. Take a look up here for a moment. Okay. What you see depends on where you look. Maybe it's some sort of candlestick here in the middle, or maybe it's two faces looking at each other. They're both there. Well, how about this one? That's actually two women. It's two women. See if you can see them both. Okay. Perhaps this is a nose. Perhaps that's a mouth of an older woman looking that direction. Or perhaps that's the chin, the nose and eyelashes of a younger woman looking away. Ladies and gentlemen, what is so critical is how you see the world. For instance, this. What some people see here are two galaxies. That one's fuzzy, that one's not. There are some people who see an actual cure for cancer. I'll come back to that. Don't worry. So one of the most important things to understand, if you're looking at the world, there are a couple of things that are going to guide you. First of all, your perspective. Your perspective is incredibly important, but it's important to recognize that your perspective will have limits to it. I'm going to give you 4 different views of the universe. These are all real views over about 1,500 years. And here's the important part. Everybody had the exact same information available to them. So for instance, this is one view of the world in the year 140. The Earth was the center of the universe. There were things called planets. You've heard of some of the planets, Mercury, Venus. The sun was considered a planet because we could see it move. If you saw it move, it was a planet. There was Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, and there was a shell of stars. Now with the exact same information, 1,400 years later, people said, wait a second, maybe the sun is the center of the universe. You still have Mercury, Venus. Earth is now a planet in this idea. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and there's still a shell of stars. Same information, very different universe. About 30 years after that, somebody came along and said, wait a second, shell of stars? No, stars are spread out through space. The year 1576 was the first time that somebody actually said outer space meant you had a lot of space. Truthfully, up until that point, people thought it was a shell. A few years after that, this one gets awesome. Okay, this one gets awesome. The Earth is the center of the universe. The moon and the sun go around the Earth. Everything else goes around the sun, and there's a shell of stars. Here's my point. Each of these models was based on the same information, but they're all different. That's because their perspectives had limits. So how do you break through limits? Boom, you get yourself some tools. Once you get tools, and in astronomy, it's the telescope. Once you get tools, your perspective changes. all of a sudden you can start not thinking about the challenges in front of you, but you're thinking about the possibilities of discovery. So you can figure out that, hey, we have something called a galaxy, a collection of 100 billion stars. Or maybe we have 100 billion of those galaxies. By the way, each piece of light you see here on this image, every single piece of light is a collection of 100 billion stars. This is considered a boring part of outer space, by the way. When they took the picture, they deliberately aimed it where there wasn't anything obvious to prove they could, to see how good their tools were, to prove that the limits that were there could be broken. We talked about how you see the world, but you have to talk about how do you see yourself? That's incredibly important. I can tell you about me. I actually grew up near the ocean, and so the concept of exploration was there. This is a very famous boat, by the way. You probably don't know it, but a lot of the people in this room do, because you've heard of a man named Jacques Cousteau. Yeah, you just heard that. They know what time it is. Jacques Cousteau was an explorer. This was his ship, the Calypso, in which he explored the ocean. There's another famous ship that I actually studied when I was a kid. Some of you recognize it. A lot more people recognize the Starship Enterprise. That's the original one, by the way. That's the very first one. Now, here's what's cool about the Starship Enterprise to me. It's not so much the pew, 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 or the space stuff. That's awesome. But here's what I got when I watched Star Trek. When I looked at this group of people, some of them looked kind of like me. Most of them didn't, but they all got along and they were studying outer space. That's what I picked up from Star Trek. Now, I was 4 years old, but that's literally when I decided to become an astronomer. I decided to study the universe at 4 years old, mostly because of that. I have never, ever wanted to study anything else in my life. I'm a lot older than 4 years old. A lot. And a lot, and a lot, and a lot. I've never wanted to study anything else. I have literally had a one-track mind my entire life. But here's why that worked for me. Because I actually got to work in some pretty cool places. I got to work with some pretty awesome telescopes. This telescope here was at Indiana University. This is where I got my first degree. I got my undergraduate degree in astronomy. I got to work here. I actually now own a piece of this. They replaced it, and anyone who ever worked there over the past, well, if you're still alive, over the past 120 years got a piece of it. So I have a piece of this. I got my second degree. I became a doctor of astronomy. So I got to work here. This is Penn State. I got to work with these telescopes. That's mine. That's the one I had built. That's me. I'm the happy-looking guy next to the guy who looks like he's a president. And he was. I got to build this, so I had the opportunity to study the universe. Everyone else is dressed nice. I'm wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I just brought a telescope. I'll wear what I want. Appearances matter, but not as much as you think. Sometimes more, but we'll talk about that. So let's talk about how you see yourself. Now, I want you to think of some of your friends while I'm talking about this. Now, some of your friends in your lives have the opinion of themselves that they are awesome. Nothing can hurt them. Yeah, you're thinking about people. People right now in your brains, you're naming people. You gotta know who they are. Some of your friends think they're like this. Oh, yeah. Can't be stopped. Now, some of you in here have friends, they don't necessarily think like this, but what they think about themselves is they can get their way out of anything. They can build. They're talented. They have some wonderful toys. They think of themselves as the Dark Knight. Now, when I was a kid, it turns out a number of girls lived down the hall from me or down the street from me, and they tended to think of themselves like this. This is Wonder Woman. She was powerful. They didn't see themselves as Superman. They weren't boys. They didn't see themselves as Batman. They saw themselves like this. Powerful woman. She was an equal. Some people think of themselves like this. Now, here's what's interesting. A lot of you know this is Wolverine. The claws aren't his power. See, I've read the comic books. His actual power is if he gets hurt, he can heal. Very different from Superman. Superman, nothing hurts him. A lot of people realize they can get hurt, but they can recover from it. That's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about yourself. I didn't see myself as any of these. This is me. Well, let's think about this for a second. Underneath that mask, he's a science nerd. Again, astronomer, 4 years old. I wanted to be a science nerd. He didn't quite understand what was happening. He didn't really understand his powers. And here's the awesome thing. Often when you're playing, especially when you're young, and you're like, I want to be so-and-so. You don't look like him. You don't look like her. Guess what? Underneath that mask, it could have been anybody. And keep in mind, where I tended to live my life, there weren't a lot of black people around. Not a lot of people who look like me. So I couldn't be Superman because Superman doesn't look like you. Spider-Man could have. And that's important to recognize because we all have various roles that we play. Now, the role model I had was this man. He's actually from Maryland. He died about 200 years before I was born. His name is Benjamin Banneker. When I was a kid, this was the only black astronomer that I knew existed. And he died in 1800. When I talk about having a role model, who you want to be? I want to be a black astronomer. How many are there? Well, apparently this guy. And some of you now watch TV, know someone named Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's rather famous, and he's in the news, and he's done some stuff. But at the time, Neil Tyson wasn't there for me. Tyson's only about 10 years older than I am. Tyson wasn't anything. When you see yourself and you see your role model, sometimes you draw them from fantasy, sometimes you draw them from history. But you have to think to yourself, once you have that idea and that understanding of who you are, once you understand how you see the world and how you see yourself, you think, where do you go? Now, because I do teach physics, and physics is sometimes a dirty word, don't worry, only 2 terms. Potential, kinetic. Most of you have heard the phrase in your life, this person has a lot of potential. Here's the problem with potential. Because when people say it, they're trying to say something positive about you. They're trying to say, you have potential. That's a good thing. Here's the problem. Charlie Brown had potential. But Charlie Brown is not the one making this scene happen. The concept of potential in physics means you're waiting. It's a resting. It's a position. But the other term, kinetic, is about action. It's about motion. Charlie Brown was potential. Lucy was kinetic. Turns out, by the way, my wife hates Lucy. Thinks Lucy is the worst person in the world. My response was, after the second time she pulled the ball, Charlie Brown knew better. There comes a point at which you have to own your actions. So, what I'm going to recommend to you is if you have the ability to either rest and wait or to act is to act. This is the most famous swordsman in Japanese history. His name is Miyamoto Musashi. He won 60 battles to the death, never defeated. Most of the time he used his swords, but sometimes he didn't have a sword, so he just used whatever was at hand. One time he was on a boat, had the boat oar, decided, I'm going to battle this guy anyway, and won. Your tools are not always obvious to you, but your tools are what are going to save you. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you some tools tonight. I want to give you some ways to understand the world. There are going to be some things that you've said in here and some answers to the questions that you posed, by the way. You may not have known you were posing some questions, but you did. So I'm going to give you some things. First of all, always evaluate yourself. One of the hardest things to do. People hate doing this. People hate evaluating themselves because sometimes they don't like the answers. Guess what? If you evaluate yourself, if you understand yourself, if you know yourself, you're going to be better able to accomplish those things that you wish to. You're going to understand your weaknesses, you're going to understand your strengths, and you'll better be able to live the lives you want. You talked about preparation. Think about, are you prepared? Because ladies and gentlemen, there's a difference between high school and college. Don't let anyone tell you differently. I was listening to someone tell me about that in the high schools, sometimes you can turn things in like weeks late, months late. Please come come to my class and try that so I can put it on YouTube when we all laugh at you. No, the world doesn't wait for you. So make sure you're doing things on time. Actually, do things ahead of time. Make your life a lot easier. Now, a lot of people, they want to get themselves in a position where they can pick off their targets, where they can choose, where they can go, I'm going to take care of this, I'm going to take care of this. A lot of people want to be sharpshooters, which is fine as long as you have focus, because sometimes the target shoots back. So you have to be ready. You have to be thinking. Now, I told you I made the choice at 4 years old, and for me it was an awesome choice, but I'm going to tell you this right now, as I've told my godson. It's okay to change your mind. If you're self-evaluating and you realize you're going down one path and it's not working for you and it's not the right path, change your mind. Don't find yourself stuck. My best friend wants me to do this. My mom wants me to do this. My friends expect me to do this. You've got to live your life. But if you're evaluating yourself, you'll be in a much better position to do this. A lot of people are going to tell you, put in effort, put in effort, put in effort. Here's a dirty secret. Effort is nice, but results are what count. I'm going to tell you that. I tried. Quite often, that's nice, but it's what did you do? Make sure that you're not saying, I tried. Make sure you say, I've done. I've completed. That is critical. Effort is important. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Here's the thing that people almost never do in my classes. They don't do this in life, and it's silly. Read ahead. If someone's going to give you information ahead of time, if you don't take the time to talk to this young man afterwards and ask him where he screwed up, then you're missing a great opportunity, because he'll be honest with you. He'll tell you what he didn't do and what he wished someone would have told him or what someone would have listened to. Now, the president came up here, he spoke, I appreciated it, you appreciated it, but you may look at him and go, I'm up here speaking, we're not necessarily one of you. He is. That doesn't mean the president didn't give you great wisdom. He did if you listened. Doesn't mean I'm not giving you some tools. I am. Take it from everywhere you can. There are going to be a lot of people in your world who think they're entitled to a college opportunity. You know this is an opportunity. None of you are to the manner born. None of you are sitting there with a silver spoon in your mouth. You weren't born on third base thinking you hit a triple. You know you're working for this. You know those people out there are supporting you because they're working for this. This is not an entitlement. This is your opportunity. If you do something poor with it, you've made a choice. I'll respect your choice, even if it's a bad one. I respect your ability to make the wrong choice, but don't. And here's the problem with college. A lot of you are first generation. I came from a very poor family. Not a lot of us went to college. And then there will be people, some of your friends who aren't here, who are going to say, you're just trying to be better than us. There may be people in your families. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to rise up? They're going to say, you're trying to be elite. Yes, you are. Good for you. I've never heard in my life any fan of a sports team say they didn't want their team to win. I've never heard anyone who's played athletics, and I have some people in my family who played pro ball. They never said, I just want to be all right. But when it comes to education, you're trying to be elite? No, you're not. You're trying to excel. But as the president pointed out very clearly, it doesn't have to be one to the left of you, one to the right of you. And I heard that speech too, by the way. I did. It doesn't have to be that. You can all rise if you choose. But the problem with that is you can be very lonely. You gave up an entire group of friends. You said it could be lonely. Let me show you what loneliness looks like. Let me give you real data. Because I'm a scientist, I believe in real data. Between July of 97 June 98, this comes from government data, and they tend to do it, they count a year as from July to June. So this is 1 year worth of time. I'm going to tell you how many people in the United States of America became a doctor of some sort of science. It turns out there were 18,125. So in the entire United States in that year, 18,125 people became some sort of doctor of science. Of that group, 555 of them were black. Okay, entire country. If you look at what we call the physical sciences, in the entire country that year, 54 people. And I got the breakdown. 43 of them were chemists. 10 were physicists. And since you've just done the math, you realize that's me, by the way. That's me. I once showed those numbers. I was giving a talk to a group of students, and a young girl raised her hand, and she said, "Didn't you ever feel lonely?" And I said, "On the one hand, it would have been nice had that number been 2. On the other hand, if I hadn't done it, it would be a 0. You may be the first. You may be the only. Will it be lonely sometimes? If you let it get to you. You may be alone, but I was never lonely. Because I knew what I was doing was meaningful to me. I had done the self-evaluation. So as you're going through this and you run into those moments, I want you to remember that. I want you to remember there are going to be moments that are career-defining for you. You don't even know necessarily what that means yet. You haven't even thought about that. But there are things that you're going to do now that will help you define your career. The actions you take, the fact that you're engaged in this program, doing what you're doing, you are defining your careers in ways that won't make any sense to you till 30 years from now. And then you'll look back and go, oh yeah, that's why I did it. I want you to move from hope to trust. You're hoping you're doing well. You're laying out your schedule. You're doing the right thing. But as soon as you start trusting yourself to it completely, then you'll see the magic happen. There is no separation between your college and your personal life. There's no separation between your work and your life in general. It's all part of you. The question is, how do you deal with those parts? Move yourselves from hope to trust. There are 5 words that each one of you has that defines your image of who you are. You may have never asked yourself what those words were. You may have never written them down. They're not words for you to share with the people in this room. They're not words for you to share with me. They're words for you to share with yourself and to keep going back to it. And to keep going back to it. This is part of self-evaluation. A lot of people make things incredibly complicated. They put a lot of words and a lot of structure. But sometimes the answer is simple. Because if you can simplify the answer and understand the path you need to be on, the rest will be details. But if you don't know where you're going, once I knew I wanted to be an astronomer, the rest of it was easy. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. There's a phrase that's not used as much anymore. People say, build a better mousetrap and the world will beat a path to your door. What they really mean by that is if you can make a simple improvement on something that matters to everyone, everyone will want it. Build your own better mousetrap for yourself. In astronomy, again, it was the telescope. So, I told you about the cure for cancer. Promised I'd get back to it. We launched a telescope in the 1990s. It was called the Hubble Space Telescope. The pictures looked like that. The mirror was broken. It was broken by less than the thickness of a human hair, by the way. Pictures look like this. Literally. That's how far off it was. Take the thickness of a human hair. It was broken just by that much. So what ended up happening was a group of astronomers made computer software to make the images look better. Okay, awesome. You get a better picture. Who cares? Some of you in this room, unfortunately, know what this is, although you've never seen it. This is a breast cancer cell. In the year 1960, it was thought that 1 in 16 women in the world would be affected by it. The number now is 1 out of 8, which means every single one of you in this room will either be affected by it yourself or you'll know someone who will be affected by it. The key to wiping out breast cancer is early detection. The same software that we built for the Hubble telescope is now being used across the country in medical facilities to be able to try to fight this disease. You never know where the answer is going to come from. You never know where the mousetrap's going to be. So ladies and gentlemen, make sure you're building your tools. Anybody in here have an iPhone? Yeah, all right, a lot of people raise their hands. Anybody in here know what an iPhone? Yeah, you know what, even if you don't know one, you know what it is. The creator of this now passed away, a man named Steve Jobs. He once said this statement. He said, "Real artists ship." What he meant by that was, you can talk about what you're going to do as much as you want, but nobody cares. What they care about is, what did you do? Real artists ship. That means produce. If you have the opportunity to produce something, produce it. Even if the only production is a better you, produce it. Fear is the mind killer. You look around here, and there are people who should be here that aren't. There are people you know that should be in the room, friends of yours, colleagues of yours, who should be here but aren't. Decisions are made by those who show up. If you are in the room, if you're taking command and control of your college life, of your personal life, of the things that you're doing, of your environment, the way that you discussed, then you will be able to make those decisions. Finally, this is one of the scariest words in the world, ladies and gentlemen. Responsibility. You've been told you need to be more responsible. You know why that's so scary? Because if you're responsible for something and it doesn't go right, it's your fault. That's why people don't like responsibility. But let me reframe it for you. Let me give you a different perspective. Let me break through the limits. If you are taking these tools, if you are engaging yourself in the way you should, if you are self-evaluating, then responsibility can simply mean that you're able to respond to anything. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening.